The first thing to understand is that I was never supposed to be in that room. I wasn't a warrior. I wasn't a diplomat. I wasn't even important enough to have a fancy title that echoed nicely in a translation chamber. I was a logistics officer, which is a polite way of saying I made sure the right crates went to the right ships and that nobody forgot to refill the water recyclers before a long jump. My job description did not include standing alone before the united elders of 12 alien civilizations while history quietly rearranged itself. And yet there I was. It started, as most catastrophes do, with coffee. Human coffee, specifically. Hot, bitter, and absolutely not rated safe for alien silk robes worth more than my yearly salary. The actual human delegate, a silver-haired admiral with medals practically breeding on his chest, had been mid-sentence when my elbow clipped the cup. Gravity, traitorous as always, did the rest. The coffee arced gracefully through the air and landed squarely across the admiral's front in a way that would have been beautiful if it weren't career-ending. The room froze. Translation drones paused mid-hum. 1,000 alien eyes tracked the steam rising from his robes. Security swarmed. Medical bots descended. The admiral was escorted out, hissing something about burns and court-martials, while I stood there holding an empty cup and wishing hyperspace would open beneath my feet and swallow me whole. That should have been the end of my involvement. Instead, the master of ceremonies cleared its throat, 3 of them, actually, and announced that the human representative would continue. Every head turned toward me. I opened my mouth to explain the mistake. I really did. I even lifted a hand. But at that exact moment, the doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and the temperature of the room seemed to drop by several degrees. She entered without escort, without ceremony, and without hesitation. She didn't need an introduction. Everyone knew who she was. I knew who she was, and I'd only skimmed the briefing packets at 3 in the morning while cursing my life choices. She was the last fertile female of her species, a biological miracle wrapped in political gravity so dense it bent entire star systems toward her. She was also looking directly at me. Not past me. Not through me. At me. The alien elders leaned forward as one. Their expressions, feathered, scaled, luminous, or otherwise, shifted into something reverent. Destiny, prophecy, fate, they had 100 words for moments like this. Humans usually just called it bad luck. She approached with calm, measured steps, her posture flawless, her expression neutral in that alien way that made it impossible to tell whether she was curious, bored, or about to dissect someone. When she stopped in front of me, the distance between us felt far too small for a room that could house a battleship. "You are human," she said. "Yes," I replied, because when the most important being in the galaxy states a fact, you agree with it. Her gaze didn't waver. "You are unadorned." "I left my medals in my other pants," I said before my brain could stop my mouth. A murmur rippled through the chamber. I felt my soul attempt to exit my body. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture I later learned meant interest. "Humor response," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Noted." Then she began asking questions. They were calm, polite, clinical. They were also the kind of questions you do not want asked about you in front of a multi-species council with recording drones. She asked about human longevity, about emotional bonding, about stress responses under pressure, about reproduction, not in a lurid way, but in the same tone a scientist might ask about fuel efficiency. Each question landed like a gentle tap from a hammer, and every elder listened like it was sacred scripture. I answered because not answering felt worse. I stumbled. I joked. I over-explained. I admitted things that had never made it into official human documentation, mostly because no one had ever thought they'd be relevant to galactic survival. Every time I tried to deflect, she watched more closely. Every time I answered honestly, she nodded, as if confirming a theory. At some point, I realized something unsettling. She wasn't disappointed. She had expected a legendary warrior, a genetic marvel, or a decorated admiral. Someone sculpted by purpose and tradition. Someone who fit neatly into prophecy and planning. Instead, she got me. A man who spilled coffee, made bad jokes, and stood there sweating through his uniform while trying to respect cultures that treated biology like religion. And she was smiling. Not openly. Her species didn't do open smiles. But there was a warmth in her posture, a softness in the way her eyes lingered after each answer. Where the elders saw data, she seemed to see something else. Variability. Uncertainty. Choice. When she finally paused, the chamber felt like it could breathe again. "I would like to continue this evaluation," she said. Privately. The elders erupted into hushed excitement. Plans were already shifting. Futures recalculating. I just stood there, heart racing, aware of one terrifying truth. Somewhere between a spilled cup of coffee and a question I never should have answered, I had become the most interesting human in the room, and she was still looking at me like I was exactly what she'd been hoping to find. If there is one universal truth about the galaxy, it's this: nothing good ever follows the phrase, "Privately, please," when it's spoken in a tone that makes 12 alien civilizations collectively hold their breath. They didn't actually let us leave immediately. Of course not. First came protocol. Ritual pauses. Low-frequency murmurs exchanged between elders who communicated partly through scent and partly through long, judgmental stares. I stood there while entire civilizations silently debated my worth like I was an unusually shaped fruit at a market. She remained beside me the entire time. Not touching. Not speaking. Just close enough that I was acutely aware of her presence, of the faint unfamiliar scent in the air, of the way her attention never truly left me even when others addressed her. It was unsettling in a way that made my skin buzz. The questioning resumed before I could gather myself. This time, the elders joined in. Their questions were worse. They weren't inappropriate by their standards. They were reverent. Sacred. The kind of inquiries normally reserved for holy texts and genetic archives. To a human ear, though, they sounded like an HR violation wrapped in a dissertation. They asked how humans chose partners. Whether attraction was biological, emotional, or accidental. One elder wanted to know if humans bonded for survival or pleasure. Another asked if reproduction was ever optional. I answered honestly, because lying seemed like a bad idea when your words were being translated, archived, and potentially carved into a moon later. "Yes," I said to one. "Sometimes," to another. "That depends entirely on the person." More times than I could count. Each response earned murmurs. Notes were taken. One crystalline being vibrated so hard it nearly fell off its perch. She listened more closely than anyone. When I explained that humans didn't organize reproduction around duty or legacy, her head tilted again. When I admitted that love often came before logic, her eyes widened just a fraction. When I joked that half of human relationships started because someone thought someone else was kind of cute, a ripple of confused awe moved through the chamber. "Your species permits randomness," she said carefully. "We encourage it," I replied. "Sometimes regret it. But yeah, big fans." That did it. The elders reacted as if I'd just declared gravity optional. A few of them began whispering urgently. One looked physically unwell. Another seemed thrilled in the way only a being who had never experienced chaos could be. She, on the other hand, looked fascinated. "Your genetic continuity is not centrally planned," she said. "Nope. You accept inefficiency. We thrive on it," I said. "It's kind of our thing." Her gaze lingered, sharp and curious, like she was seeing a crack in reality she'd never known existed. I realized then that she wasn't just studying me. She was studying humanity through me, and finding something both alarming and compelling. The elders eventually called for a recess, which in galactic terms meant everyone argued quietly while pretending not to. I was guided to a smaller chamber with her, escorted by drones that watched us like I might spontaneously evolve or something. The doors sealed behind us with a soft hum. The silence that followed was somehow louder than the council chamber. Up close, she was even more intimidating, not physically, but conceptually. Entire generations rested on her existence. Every movement she made carried weight. And yet, when she spoke now, her voice was lower, more personal. "You were not prepared for this," she said. "Ma'am," I replied. "I was prepared to inventory cargo crates. That's about it." Something like amusement flickered across her features. "You answered despite discomfort. Humans do that," I said. "Mostly to avoid worse discomfort later." She considered that. "Your honesty was inefficient, yet effective. That's my performance review in a nutshell." For the first time since she'd entered my life, she laughed, not openly, but softly, like a sound she wasn't entirely used to making. It hit me harder than it should have. "You are not what was expected," she said. That was disappointing. My stomach sank. "However," she continued, "you are what was needed." That was worse, somehow. She stepped closer, not enough to be threatening, but enough that the air between us felt charged. "My people have studied thousands of species. We sought strength, stability, predictability. We failed. And now you're stuck with us," I said. "Yes," she replied. "And you." There was no accusation in her tone. No command. Just a statement of fact that somehow felt like a choice. I swallowed. "I should probably warn you, I'm not special." She studied me for a long moment. "You are adaptable. Emotionally expressive. Unafraid of vulnerability. You joke when afraid. You answer questions meant to strip you bare with words meant to connect." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again. No one had ever described me like that before. "The Council believes destiny brought you here," she said. "I do not." "What do you believe?" I asked. She met my eyes fully now. "I believe coincidence revealed possibility." Outside the chamber, the elders waited. Plans continued forming without us. Entire civilizations balanced on decisions neither of us had technically agreed to. Inside, it was just the last fertile female of her kind and a human who spilled coffee for a living, quietly realizing that this wasn't about obligation or prophecy anymore. It was about choice. And for the first time since I walked into that room, I wasn't laughing out of panic. I was smiling because, somehow, against every expectation in the galaxy, she was actually listening to me. The door sealed behind us with a soft hum that felt far too intimate for a room designed for meetings of interstellar importance. For a moment neither of us spoke. The air seemed too thick with unspoken expectation, and I realized I had no idea how to navigate a conversation with the last fertile female of her species, let alone one who was actively staring at me as though I were the universe's greatest puzzle. She finally broke the silence. "You are resilient," she said. The words sounded measured, almost clinical, but there was a flicker in her expression that hinted at curiosity, maybe even admiration. I cleared my throat. "I survive mostly because I trip less than I fall, and occasionally, luck helps." Her lips quirked in the faintest approximation of a smile, and I felt a strange warmth at the acknowledgement. She didn't laugh out loud. Her species rarely did, but the gesture was enough to remind me that we weren't in a court of judgment anymore. For the first time, it felt like we were two beings just existing in the same space. She took a step closer, and I had to remind myself not to overreact. The council chamber had been intimidating, but here, the quiet made it almost suffocating. She looked at me like she was reading a complex text written entirely in gestures, hesitation, and instinct. "You are not what I expected," she admitted. "You are human." "That's flattering?" I said, unsure whether to bow salute, or just back away slowly. She ignored the question. "I have been studied, observed, and revered since birth. Everything about my existence has been documented, controlled, and predicted. And yet, here you are, speaking, imperfectly, unpredictably, without calculation. You have no blueprint, and yet—" She paused, letting the words linger. "You persist." I wanted to say something clever, but the truth was simpler and far more embarrassing. I was terrified. Completely, utterly, embarrassingly terrified. Yet there was something about her gaze, calm, steady, attentive, that made it slightly easier to breathe. I have to admit, I said finally, I was expecting someone different. You know, intimidating, all-powerful, probably wielding a staff or laser or something. She tilted her head and considered me carefully. Powerful in what way? Physical strength? Genetic potential? Political influence? All of the above? I suggested weakly. I was expecting someone who could probably crush me with one thought, and maybe still have time to file reports for the council. She laughed softly. It wasn't loud, but the sound echoed through the chamber in a way that made me feel like a private performance had begun. You underestimate humanity, she said. Your species is chaotic, adaptive, surprisingly enduring. You survive where others would fail because you embrace unpredictability, humor, and emotion. I survive mostly because I trip less than I fall, I repeated automatically. She raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by the consistency, and I realized she liked the joke, even if it was small. For a long moment, we just stood there, silently analyzing one another. I noticed the subtle tension in her posture, the way her hands moved slightly when she spoke, the way her eyes held mine without blinking. There was a strange intimacy in it, entirely unintentional, and I felt my face warm under the weight of her gaze. You are unique, she said softly. Not for your strength, your genetics, or your status, but for your approach to existence itself. Your resilience is not physical, it is emotional, mental, unpredictable. And it fascinates me. I swallowed, unsure how to respond. I think most humans would call that messy, I said. We survive because we're messy. Emotionally messy, socially messy, morally messy, but somehow, it works. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in judgment but in curiosity. Messy, yet effective. That is, remarkable. She stepped a fraction closer, just enough that the space between us felt charged. Most species fail to understand the appeal of imperfection. Humans embrace it. I think it's more like stumbling into brilliance by accident, I said. We're not graceful about it. And yet, she murmured, you attract attention, respect, curiosity, even affection. I laughed nervously, because that was the most absurd thing I had ever heard. You're saying that, and you're staring at me. That's not normal for your species, right? No, she admitted. We observe. We analyze. We respect. And sometimes, she hesitated. Sometimes we are drawn to what cannot be predicted. You are unpredictable. I blinked. So basically, I'm a hot mess, and that's supposed to be impressive? Her expression softened, just slightly, and she nodded. In ways you cannot comprehend, yes. It is compelling. The words hit me in a way I didn't expect. Compelling. Not useful, not perfect, not necessary. Compelling. For the first time since I spilled coffee on the Admiral, I felt like I might have a chance, not because I fulfilled some prophecy, but because she actually saw me. She stepped back then, giving me space, but her gaze never wavered. There is much to learn from your kind, she said, almost to herself. Your unpredictability, your humor, your resilience, it is a perspective I have never known. I wish to understand it further. I could teach you, I said impulsively. But full disclosure, I charge in human jokes, bad advice, and awkwardness. Very high subscription rates. Her lips twitched in a way that might have been a smile. I am willing to pay that price. And just like that, the formalities, the prophecy, the weight of the galaxy's expectations, all of it, slid to the background. For the first time, we weren't last chance savior and chosen vessel. We were two beings figuring each other out, fumbling through the unfamiliar, laughing in the face of perfection. It wasn't love yet. Not really. But it was something else, curiosity, connection, and an unspoken promise that maybe, just maybe, being human wasn't the disaster she expected it to be. And somehow, that was more important than surviving the council chamber. For the first time, I realized that the most powerful thing I could offer wasn't strength, skill, or genetic potential, it was myself. Messy, awkward, entirely human. And she seemed interested in seeing just how far that could go. The elders were still waiting. Somewhere beyond reinforced doors and translational fields, the entire council of 12 civilizations debated, whispered, and predicted outcomes as if I were a chess piece rather than a person. Meanwhile, in the room with her, I felt like I had just walked through a storm and emerged soaking but oddly exhilarated. She watched me with that calm, measured gaze that could have frozen stars in place if she wanted. "They will expect a decision," she said softly, almost as if reading my thoughts. "A choice made for them, for my species, for everything." "I'm not exactly the decisive type," I admitted. "I trip over my own feet, let alone the future of a civilization." She tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her expression. "You are human. You do not fit expectations. Yet you persist, make choices, and continue despite fear." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, that's about my resume in a nutshell. Fear and coffee stains. Mostly coffee stains." Her soft amusement made the space between us feel smaller, warmer, strangely intimate despite all the protocol and prophecy hovering outside. "You understand that your choice carries weight," she said, voice low. "Not just for you, not just for me, but for them. For everyone who depends on me surviving." "I understand," I said honestly. "And I'm terrified. But if you're looking for someone to blindly follow tradition or destiny, that's not me. I'm human. We're a little chaotic. We figure things out as we go." She studied me in silence. Then, slowly, she smiled, not fully, not in a human way, but enough to feel like sunlight piercing through alien architecture. "That may be exactly what I need," she said. Outside, the council continued their deliberations. I could almost feel their impatience, the mounting pressure for a resolution. Their ideas of protocol, prophecy, and perfection collided with the simple, messy reality of two beings making a choice. And in that quiet room, it felt like we were the only ones who mattered. "Your people expect me to decide immediately," she said. "To choose based on what is logical, predictable, necessary. And yet," her gaze softened, "I find myself questioning whether necessity is the same as desire." "That's a lot of pressure," I said, hard hammering. "I mean, deciding the fate of your species while simultaneously trying not to die of embarrassment isn't exactly in my skill set." "I do not require perfection," she said. "I require presence. Choice. Willingness to act despite uncertainty." I swallowed. "Well, I can do that. Imperfectly. Clumsily. With too much caffeine. But yeah, I can do that." Her laugh, soft, barely audible, was the first sound that felt like relief. "That is acceptable." We stood there, the hum of alien technology and distant deliberations fading into irrelevance. Choice, it seemed, was more powerful than prophecy. More powerful than tradition. More powerful than expectation. I realized then that the council could demand nothing from me. The only decision that truly mattered was the one we made together. "So," I said, attempting humor to mask the anxiety curling in my stomach, "what you're saying is, you're not going to force me into some dramatic destiny you've been rehearsing for centuries?" "Not if you choose not to participate," she said. Her tone was calm but firm, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Participation is voluntary. Even when the stakes are immense." I exhaled, realizing that for the first time since walking into that room, I felt a shred of agency. Choice. Freedom. And maybe even something more dangerous. Hope. "I choose to figure it out," I said finally. "With you. Not because of destiny or prophecy. Not because anyone says I should. But because I want to. And apparently that's chaotic enough to count as impressive." She considered my words, her gaze steady and penetrating. "You do not speak as one trained in diplomacy or ritual," she said softly. "And yet you speak with clarity. You speak honestly. You speak human. And it is compelling." I flushed. "Compelling, huh?" That's a nice word for completely unqualified. No, she corrected. It is a word for choice. Agency. Courage. You offer what no prophecy, ritual, or genetic blueprint could yourself. The Council's pressure, the looming weight of interstellar expectation, all of it receded. It didn't vanish entirely, but in that moment, it no longer controlled us. There was no prophecy dictating our next move, no protocol enforcing rigid behavior. There was just the two of us, standing in a quiet chamber, making a choice neither entirely safe nor entirely rational. I think we'll cause a few headaches, I said. They're not used to people making their own decisions. She allowed herself a full, subtle smile. Then let us proceed with honesty. Together. And in that quiet understanding, a strange calm settled over me. We were not perfect. We were not ready. But we were choosing, actively, willingly, defiantly. And somehow, that was enough. Whatever the Council decided, whatever traditions dictated, whatever the galaxy expected, we had discovered the most extraordinary power of all. The power to choose, the power to connect, the power to embrace chaos and make something beautiful out of it. I reached out, not boldly, not presumptively, but with human hesitation, and she met my gesture with a careful, deliberate acknowledgement. That simple act, small and absurd in the context of an entire species' survival, felt monumental. In that moment, I realized something important. We didn't need to be heroes. We didn't need perfection, prophecy, or even agreement. We only needed ourselves, each other, and the courage to make a choice that no one else could make for us. And as we stood there, together, quietly defying expectation and embracing possibility, I couldn't help but think that perhaps chaos, laughter, and human messiness were exactly what the universe needed after all.